Yeah, we can continue to talk about trees when he calls me. Hi, Pat.
Cynthia is going to be a little late. She couldn't find the email to sign in.
Is she all set now?
I think so.
I think Sophie could send her a new invite if we need to.
Yeah. Well, I just forwarded mine to her, so we'll see if she gets that.
I think those are unique, the panelist ones, so it may not work.
Uh-oh. Well,
Hey, Sophie.
Just resent Cindy
Thank you.
a link.
thank you very much.
That was the Gmail account she has?
It's CD Belize.
Oh, that's a problem. Let me go send her the right link.
Okay, I think that's why she didn't get it.
Yeah, she's got a Hotmail and a Gmail, but Gmail's her one right now.
Started yet?
Yes, we started.
So we could start without Cindy if you want, push through some of this procedural stuff. If that makes sense.
Do you want me to call her? I'll call her.
Okay.
Make sure she's looking.
It went to the correct email address this time.
Okay. All right, while we wait for Cindy to join up, I think we could get started. So roll call, all the members are here, just waiting on Cindy's link to come through. The agenda review, did anyone have anything they'd like to add to the agenda?
One minor item under tree evaluations, it says no pending evaluations for the board. I uploaded to the Google Drive template that we had used in the past as a draft possible for discussion fodder. To
Okay.
record the information on the trees that we do look at.
Talk about a tree log when we get to that.
Watch list. I think I
Right.
like the way that sounds.
Yeah, we need a watch list too. Yeah.
I have one thing. We might want to talk about tree planting and where. I think that we should have something in there that we don't plant trees other than dwarf type species under wires. We sort of said we're not going to do that, and we haven't in the last few years, but maybe that ought to be in the ordinance so that in the future it doesn't get, it just, the trees grow up and then we got to pay a lot of money to get them taken down. There are some species that we can plant, like crabapple, dogwood, that type of thing.
Okay. But we'll talk about that when we get to that one too, Dave. The minutes are not quite ready yet for us to look at from the last meeting. So Nancy promised she'd get caught up with us at the next meeting. So at our next meeting, we'll approve both the January and February minutes, if that works for everyone.
Okay.
So yes, tree evaluations, I don't have any requests at this point pending. I had the contractor lined up for the Cottonwood on North Main Avenue, excuse me, other side, Crosby Street, other side of town. But he had a mechanical failure last week on Friday or Thursday or Friday and couldn't make it. So we were kind of watching the weather this week. So that one will be soon. And that'll be quickly followed by the work on Forest Hill Terrace. So that I'm still working on getting those things scheduled.
Rob, can you will you go on site while this is happening, and could you take some photos to
Sure.
just so we have these sorts of things? It might, I don't know, it seems like there'd be some usefulness in the future. Plus, I think after Dave sent around that or someone did the photos from the one where the UCU is now, that was really handy to have that. So it'd be great, and then we could just put it in our shared drive.
All right, Cindy can't get on still for some reason, but she sent you her little draft of minutes to your email, Rob.
Okay. I didn't get them yet. I wonder if she's having a connection problem.
But she didn't know.
Okay.
There is a phone number, Pat, that she could use in that invite that we got.
866-2177.
No, no, I'm in a hurry.
Huh?
This is not it. This is it.
It's at the very bottom of the invitation that she would have got. It said or telephone, but dial, and then it's like a 1646.
No, I don't have it.
So if she can come in as
She could, if she can bring up the agenda, there's a link on the top of that agenda. She could join the meeting through that, and then Sophie could promote her.
These modern inventions are really wonderful when they work.
They are. So, Tim, in terms of I actually keep a log of trees, tree activity. Before I share it with you though, I'd kind of like to clean it up a little bit. It's always been sort of my thing that I've used to track all this with, and it reads a lot like yours. That's how I don't lose track of where I have stumps to grind and those sorts of things. I keep a log of that. I got to check it for spelling and stuff like that because it's
Sure.
more like my notes to myself sort of thing. But I think if I shared that, that goes back to, I guess I started that maybe around 2012-ish. So there's going to be 8 or 10 years worth of stuff of information there that we can use for historical data. And then we could just keep building that one if that works for that. That's more the activity. The watch list, I think, makes sense to create its own, because things could get moved from the watch list to the activity log, depending on how things go.
Can we
So-
keep them in one place on one tab and just list the fact that it's a status of watch or a status of required activity or taken activity? Or
I was kind of thinking that we could just add a tab to that, keep it on the same sheet.
Yep.
But I could add another tab to that workbook and I'll call it the watch list. And then, that way, if something does move over from the watch list to the activity log, it's just a quick copy and paste kind of thing.
I was thinking just add a column that tracks it as a status of watch or activity. And then it's all on the same page. So we could look it up in one place if there's an address, 9,999 Main Street. We pull up that address and find out that 3 trees have been on the watch list in the past, but we haven't visited them in 3 years. And now they're asking for another watch line item. And
Yep.
then it moves to activity. So then you can see the whole history of it in one place.
Okay.
If you want, I would be willing to set up time with you to play with how to
Sure.
structure it. The big thing for me is that it's got to work for you because you're the one that's going to be in it all the time, and I want to make sure that it's
Yeah,
easy.
it's a
that
tool
really
for
is.
me right now to manage activity with that. So I'd want to keep that as consistent as I could, but
Yep,
I'm
absolutely.
flexible. So let's
Yeah, and if it
let's
doesn't,
make
if
that a
it
let's make
doesn't
that
work
an
to keep it
agenda
together,
item.
sure.
I'll
Capital K.
we'll plan on talking about that in March, and I'll reach out to you in between, Tim, and we'll have a conversation.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rob.
The best part of what I heard was the keeping track of things over time. So I like systems that don't overwrite with where you
Yeah.
have a cell and you write like what you did, and then when you update it, you write over that cell. I like a system that has we have looked at this 3 years in a row, and here's the progression of how things are going.
Well, and then back to your point of taking pictures of the result, if we do take an action, if, was the tree, as bad as we thought it was, or was it worse?
We also have a GIS system that kind of lends itself really well to this type of activity. So, and we could create a couple different collectors, or we just do it with one collector that would allow us to track an unlimited amount of data and it ends up mapping it too. So we could create maps of our activity and stuff. So I've always felt like the tree board activity really kind of fits well in a GIS world. And I think I'm going to have to let go of my Excel spreadsheet at some point and create a collector, because that can be everything. That can be a tool for managing operations, but also at the same time be something that documents activity and allow us to track things over time. So I think that's where we're going to end up with this, but I'm not quite ready to make that leap just yet.
Is that working with Ray?
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely would make it work. I had played around with the inventory data to try and get it in. I didn't have the full ArcGIS license to play around with it. So I was using some free software and I wasn't able to get it into a usable state and overlaid with the town's base map. Ray certainly could, and I don't know if Jessica has resources through the university to, to do that, but Ray certainly absolutely could. And I would love to see that data brought into the GIS, because to your point, you would stand in front of the tree and each of us could have an application on our smartphone and report our findings. You'd have it all in one place, and then we could bring up a map of the town and show where issues are happening.
That's where we can attach photos of the evaluation of the, whatever we end up doing. If we prune it, we can attach photos. I think it's a great direction, but probably one we need to go in for sure. So that was all I had for a tree report. Sophie, I don't know if you want to talk now about the communication.
So Rob asked me to talk just for a couple minutes about the fact that as you guys formalize your operations and are having meetings, we have to look at the fact that you're handling and creating public information. And there's a body of statute that directs what we do with that. So every year I give council a 1-hour training on this. I'm not going to do that tonight. So the gist of what I tell them is because you are appointed to this board, you are a public official. So when you talk about the tree board, if there are more than 2 of you in a space, you are having an illegal meeting if you're talking about tree board business, because the work of the tree board is supposed to happen in public. And I realize that we're kind of moving to a more formal approach to the tree board. I think when it becomes very important is Rob's making sure that you have agendas that are going out and being published, and Nancy is helping you keep a record of what you're doing, which those are both important elements. The piece that can confuse people the most is around email. We love to use email to communicate. However, when you are emailing back and forth about the tree board or about an issue on the tree board, you are actually creating a public document. And that public document I am required to archive on a schedule and provide it to people should they ask for it. So Rob and I went back and forth with how you could manage that information. We didn't think that there was enough activity on the tree board to give people separate email addresses. So our thought, if you agreed, was if you simply just remembered to copy Rob in your communications, his email, it will flow into his email and he can archive it that way. So all the tree board stuff, if I had to run a search, I can pick up in his file. I just need you guys to agree that when you're going back and forth, you're going to remember to copy Rob. I think that seems like the most simple way to manage it. So that is an hour of training boiled down. Yes, ma'am.
I think, well, I think we do that anyways naturally, and so that's
Yeah.
going to be really easy to adopt. I do have a question about, we have gone on consultations where we've been asked to look at a tree, and does that mean that we need to visit these trees more to make sure that we do that independently and not set up a time to go look at a tree because we would need to go through some sort of notification process? I think we could do that. It would just be like, oh yeah, let's stop setting times to go look at trees together. I think we've only done that once, that in my time on the board.
Yeah, I think if to go by the letter of the law, it would be best if you could just kind of make your own way out. If there are 3 of you in a car driving out, then just, don't decide what you're going to do with the tree sitting there. The conversation, the whole point of the Freedom of Access Act is to make sure that the public has a spotlight on how you make your decision, not just the decision that you reach, but how you make it. So if you and Rob and Matt all decided to go out and look at the tree at the same time, you definitely shouldn't be talking about, this is what we need to do and make that happen. I don't think you would anyway. But I would just be very transparent when you come to the meeting that you went out, you looked at it, this is what you saw, this is why you think you should do X, Y, or Z. And when I listen to your conversations, Jessica, that is kind of how you function anyway. You're pretty independent folks, which is part of what makes this board work so well.
Great, thanks.
Does that work for you, Rob?
Yeah, so all of this kind of circles around that point of creating a public document. So this board doesn't have to do a lot of texting back and forth or any of those sorts of things. So I don't think that it's really an issue that way. So yeah, I think if we just try to work to keep doing basically what we're doing now and copy me on board communications, we can, you know, coordinate getting things put together that way. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, any other questions for Sophie? Then we'll move on to the larger topic for tonight, which was the review and comment of the existing Chapter 38. So the goal tonight isn't necessarily to rewrite everything. Tonight, I think I'd like to just kind of get your opinions and thoughts about potential revisions, and then I can kind of work with Sophie on the language. And you know, the ordinance language has to be very specific sometimes, and so if we could just kind of go through it and establish some goals for what the revision should or could look like, and maybe throw some language out there. We could use the document that Tim posted in the shared file as sort of a, probably what I'll end up doing is creating a copy of that. And then once we start doing the revisions, but we'll see how that works. But I'm just really interested in hearing what the board's thoughts are on the existing ordinance and ways you all think it might be able to be improved.
I think the most daunting thing is what we run into right off the bat with the ordinance, where it talks about the Dutch elm disease, and I would like to see that revised to something that's broader about forest health and tree pests and disease, and not so specific to Dutch elm disease. Or maybe we need to keep that, but house it within a larger framework of being concerned about all tree pests and disease. And that would give us room and responsibility to take on things like emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, or hemlock woolly adelgid, or any of the other brown tail moth sorts of things. And I don't know, it just seems like we're dealing with all sorts of tree pests and disease, and it should be covered. If we're going to cover Dutch elm disease, we need to cover all the other ones. And so rather than be specific, maybe something broad.
I agree. I like that suggestion. I had read the Dutch elm portion and thought, yes, it's important to have it in there. But to your point, I wasn't fully at ease and not recognizing any of the other pests. And there's certain to be more of them as time goes by.
Could we include the Dutch elm disease as it originally occurred, but then have another sentence or paragraph referring to subsequent tree issues and not name them, so that we can just, whatever comes along, we can deal with?
Yeah,
I
my
mean-
thought was similar to that in terms of creating some kind of preamble, if you will, to that would
Yeah,
sort of could make some relatively broad statements that give the tree board and the tree warden authority to act as necessary, because I don't think we should, I think creating a list of potential diseases will
right.
just sort of paint yourself into a corner again. So,
Mm,
creating some kind of it could probably be just like I said, a general statement at the beginning that gives the board and the tree warden the authority to act as necessary. And then the existing Dutch elm disease could be presented almost like an example of potential actions that could be taken by the board, and as it's related to any disease, not necessarily specific to Dutch elm.
Right, these are trees
Right.
that are in the public right of way, is that correct? We're only talking about the trees in the public right of way?
So in this case, there is a little bit of language in there that allows the tree warden, as necessary, to cross onto private property to manage the disease. So,
All right,
Um,
so you got American beech, which has the scale insect disease. It's everywhere. Mainly it's out in the forest. But if we are careful, I don't think we want to require people to go out and remove all the diseased beech trees, because it'd be impossible. I think there's different kinds of diseases, and some of them are actually diseases and some of them are insect infestations. And they're different. They're handled different.
Rob, can we refer out to I don't know, a document that would have essentially the protocols for specific diseases? And in here, in the actual ordinance, it refers out to that document, and that document has the voluminous pieces it has Dutch elm disease and emerald ash borer and the hemlock, woolly adelgid.
That we would
Guessing.
create, Tim, or that you think like the state has a list of recommended protocols by health issue?
I hadn't gotten quite that far. I just didn't know if keeping the ordinance succinct and giving us the preamble as it was described, and I think that's a great way of presenting the information. And then if somebody wanted or needed more detail, it would be in that document that could be maintained separately and would be able to be updated and maintained, easier than getting an ordinance updated.
Guessing Sophie chimed in because in general, that's probably not a good idea, right, Sophie? Because
I wouldn't refer to a body of material that's someplace else. However, an ordinance could give you a preamble, give the tree board the authority to regulate trees, illnesses, infestations, but then use language that says the tree board shall promulgate policies to be approved by the town council and available to the public regarding, but you do it as a town
As a
policy.
policy, yes. That
you
I didn't have the language, so thank you. Yes.
That's my job.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you keeping us on the straight side. Thank you.
yeah, that was going to be my suggestion. We could create a policy as a supplement to our management plan that dealt specifically with diseases. There's a few options that we can do outside the ordinance, as long as we refer to those and say that basically charge the tree board with developing those policies. and make them public.
I do think one thing that is, it was touched on, but it needs to be highlighted, is that this Dutch elm disease section really is focused on all trees in the town, including those on private land. And so that, I think we should be careful in the wording about which, I would say all forest health issues on public trees, publicly owned trees, would be within our purview, but it would, I could see that maybe when this was first introduced, that Dutch elm disease maybe warranted the giving the authority to go onto private land, but that not all pests and disease are of that significance or crisis that it requires that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that's a huge step to take with an ordinance. So we need to be careful in how we word the broad statement. That
I think we should think about what that criteria is as a homework assignment, and perhaps there's something of a federal list or a state quarantine, or there must be some objective threshold at which it becomes such a community crisis that it warrants that. But I don't, off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure what that would be.
Yeah, a couple. So when it talks about the public health officer. So that sort of sends you into a different area of emergency management, and that might be where we want to be if something would have to be deemed some type of a public emergency or crisis, like you said, that would bring other officials into play within the local municipality, but also state and federal levels as well. So let me look into that, and we'll think about that, because I think it would have to be something, or perhaps we could allow for some sort of directive from town council at the very, I guess when you think about checks and balances, I think it would start at the local level with town council. So maybe we could, let me talk with Sophie about what she thinks that might look like, and we'll go from there.
If you wanted, I could send you the emails of the Maine Forest Service has a forest health division
Yep.
with entomologists and pathologists, and maybe they have recently updated vegetation ordinances that are good examples of this, trying to be flexible for all of the future pests and diseases. They might have examples, and so I'll make a note to connect you.
Perfect. Okay, moving on, I guess, you get into the meat and potatoes of the ordinance after that. In Article 3, it starts talking about trees in general, and statement of purpose. It gives some definitions. Did we have questions about anything in there? I had Tim made a few comments, but does anyone?
There were a couple of just inconsistencies with, it didn't specifically call out, removal of trees in, what is it, 3851, planting and maintenance and removal of trees, and I added in the public rights of way. Just again, it said along public streets, but again, just making sure that people understand that it's the trees that are in the rights of way. So we had the tree recently that was just outside the right of way. So really it was it ended up being outside our purview.
Yeah, you kind of get there. You got to go around the barn a little bit. So that was one of the notes that I put in, because it defines public trees, but then it defines what a street or highway is. And that's where you see the reference to the right of way. So you got to you got to read too far in. I agree, Tim, to get to the right of way on that. I had that as a note. I think last time we mentioned the makeup of the tree board. calls for 57%. That'd be 4 out of 7 to be sufficiently trained in arboriculture. So I wondered if arboriculture was too specific. I don't know if we should broaden that. I mean, obviously the intent is to create a certain level of expertise in the tree board for tree related issues. But
taking a slight step back, and we might need to bring in Sophie on this. I wasn't sure if there's an opening on the tree board. Is there a minimum number of people that we need to operate? If we don't have 7, as it says, the board is made of 7, or shall consist of 7. But if we have 6, then are we still a board? Or do we have to wait until the 7th is approved?
You are still a board and you can still get things done. You just, if there's anything that takes a vote to be a legal action of the board, you still are required to have 4 affirmative votes. So it's not a majority of the people present, it's a majority of the board itself. So you still need to have 4 votes.
Okay.
So when you get below 4, I got to call a lawyer to get another answer.
Or we could just get a member.
All right.
I noticed later, so I think in this section, we need to add, in 2 other places, we mentioned the chairperson of the tree board, but there's no description of who the chairperson is, how they're elected, how long they serve, and that might be, we know it's Dave Thompson until he relinquishes his reign, but maybe we could have something in there so that if it really is the tree warden and the chairperson that later makes decisions, then we need that addressed.
yeah, I was looking for something. There isn't anything in there about officers of the board or anything like that. So I was wondering if, because it's a board of the town, Sophie, maybe you can talk to that one too.
You can't hide, Sophie.
Since it's,
I'm trying.
all boards of this municipality have a certain makeup, and so therefore the tree board has this makeup, or should we identify officers and terms within this ordinance?
So, it's always good to have an individual who is agreed upon by the board itself to be a primary contact. Whether you endow that person with authority is up to the ordinance, which would be council or you. I've got some boards that they have one individual that is purely point of contact, but does not do anything other than facilitate meetings. I have other boards where staff facilitates the meeting and everybody just kind of comes together as a team. So I think you can do what you want to do. But the point it's a well stated point that if you're going to have a system, you should probably say how somebody is going to get elected or appointed and how often you're going to have that discussion. Because we all know that Dave will in fact maintain this seat forever.
I make a motion that
So,
Let me tell you why I became the chair. Nobody else wanted it. Nobody would do it. So instead of seeing it just disintegrate, I said, all right, I'll be the chair. And I really didn't want to do that. That's when Ann Pilcher left. That was quite a while ago. So it was by default. And I'd be glad to give it up if somebody else wants to take over.
I think I've seen campaign signs on Jessica's front lawn,
uh-oh.
out of the right of way.
That said Dave Thompson for tree board chair. Yeah.
I just
So-
said I saw campaign signs. I didn't say for who.
I like a 1-year term because that's easier to get people to make a commitment to, but I do think that at least for the time being, we should elect Dave Thompson annually for chairperson. But that shouldn't be in the ordinance, but I like the one, if we're getting down into the weeds, I like the 1-year term.
All right, I also should say that Cindy Blease has served as like a co-chair for a number of years. So really, there's 2 of us. They're doing it because nobody else wanted to do it.
Right, that's right.
Let
I don't know.
me take a shot at I'll add a paragraph, I'll add a section to that paragraph, a paragraph to that section. Anyway, I'll add something in there about officers and terms, and because I agree that's important to identify, if for no other reason, being a primary contact is important.
So back to your original question, which is the section A of requiring an arboriculture. I suggested the following at the end is trained in arboriculture, forestry, or comparable plant science. And I didn't like the language necessarily, but
All right,
In our background, no, we have an ad out for another person to be on our board. And Sophie rewrote the preference should be given with a background in arboriculture, forestry, and other natural resources.
okay.
all right. Let me just chime in here for a minute, because I'm a registered professional forester and a graduate, but I'm not an arboriculturist. And when it comes to diseases of plants, I took plant pathology over 50 years ago. So I'm lucky to remember what the course was about. And for a while, we had Dave Lambert was on the board, who was a forest pathologist or a pathologist, and he was very good. You really need somebody on the board that has that background, so that when we're looking at diseased trees, we know how serious it is.
Right.
And I'm not qualified at all. You know, when it comes to talking about, well, is the tree structurally sound? That's a little bit different, because you can look at the way the tree's branches come out and the weight of the limbs and so on, and are they over the road and over the wires. But diseases are very difficult. But Dave Lambert, I believe, still, if we wanted him to, would come look at something if we had a
He
question.
acts as a consultant.
So he's sort of an ad hoc or whatever member.
I like the word preference, and I agree that it'd be great to have arborists on the board, but I just think that there's such a limited number that meet the residency requirement, and they would much rather avoid a conflict of interest in order to get contracts, that it's probably unreasonable, and that we need the flexibility. And I like Tim's wording, and maybe we can combine them and throw in natural resources. I do think there's the saying comparable plant science lets us pick up people with agricultural knowledge, with other people on campus that work within plant science. And so that could get us what we need.
Okay, I'll take a shot at rephrasing that, and we can talk about it. That works. Any questions about the tree warden comments? About the tree warden section?
The one,
The tree warden have
Oh,
a
one
badge
question
that goes with the job?
He didn't hear you.
Does the tree warden have a badge that goes with the job that says he's the tree warden, so that when he goes out to accost somebody, they know he really means business?
he has to pull up to a tree and flash it to the tree.
Yeah,
I want to see.
I've never flashed my badge.
It's a tree cookie from a sapling.
Yeah.
Again, this one might be a Sophie piece, but in C of that section, it talks about establishing standards for the selection, planting, maintenance, and removal of public trees. That kind of goes back to Dave's comment early on about setting up the document. The reason I come back to it is we talked about policies. How would we create standards, and how would they how would they be essentially referenced in here, tied in here, and then again, made public? How do we get them out so people can see them?
I think we can get them out by posting them on the website is the easiest way. And I think it's a good idea where this is tied in with council, that we create the standard. We just let council take a look at it to make sure that we're within their vision. And then you guys can vote on them and pass them, and it's written. And usually, depending on how specific you're getting, if it's really technical, like the conversation we're having about Dutch elm, if we were going to get on to people's private property, I would want that to go by get a legal review, so that you're not out doing something and then causing problems that I can't
yeah.
defend.
Because we don't have a badge. Well, it goes back to, again, the standards for selection, planting, maintenance, and I would suggest that handling diseases would be part of the maintenance part of it. So would promulgating standards, back to the whole discussion of assisting with diseases or disease management or pest management of public trees, that we could handle it all through standards, that we say the standard is not planting invasives or not planting whatever, again, as you said, write them up, show them to council. Somebody would keep us on the straight and narrow to make sure that we're in the right place with them.
I kind of envision that all living sort of in our management plan. So sections of the management plan will talk about, recommended methods for planting, how to, I see that as a pretty comprehensive document, I think, once we're finished with it.
Some of what we
The
do is
idea of it
pretty
all being in one
subjective.
spot, the management plan.
So Tim had some questions. Okay to move on? Are we good?
Move on, it's getting supper time.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to. When Dave gets hungry, it's not good.
He'll bring out his badge.
Yeah, right. Permits. This is so I have never formally issued like a written, like something that would read like a building permit for the removal of a tree. It's always been a little bit more informal, and this is probably something I think I need to make it a little more formal, I guess.
Rob, I agree with you 100%, because remember that individual that cut a tree down? We told him not to do it and he did it anyway. So if a permitting process has been in place, we could have taken him to court or fined him or whatever. It was a big tree and he shouldn't have done it. So you need something.
So
Yeah, and until you said that, I wondered if maybe it should just be rewritten to reflect the practice, which is informal. But if you think more formal is helpful, then
I think, like Dave said, formal doesn't mean complicated, like I always say. So we can add in through code enforcement. I think I can add a little module in there for tree permits. It's not going to be all that often, frankly, because trees, generally, if a public tree is going to be removed or maintained, it's something that I'm doing through Public Works. So, I guess we've had a couple of situations where people have approached us about cleaning out the backside of their property, and a couple of trees were on public land, and they wanted to, and we've had those situations. I see that as a situation where we'd issue a permit to say, yes, we've looked at this area and you want to take a couple of these trees down after you take some that are on your property, and it makes sense. tree board agrees, I could issue a permit, you know, that kind of thing. So there's probably a place for it, but then, you know, where it really would be important is if I said, no, you can't remove a tree. We'd need something to stand up on, and having a permit process gives you that. So I think, was it in this section, Tim, you asked about notifying the tree? That was, well, that's coming up in the construction piece.
Yeah, it talks about tunneling and or trenching. But I also noticed later on, because I was reading it from top to bottom and was commenting as I was reading and thinking about the section, it does exempt utilities. So I don't know what that, you know, I don't think many people probably tunnel or trench across the right of way
Yeah,
through a public tree. So I don't know if that's any big deal. I was just wondering if we, you know, do you get notices from digsafe or whatever the permitting system is to say somebody's going to be going through, and then do you visit all of those sites if it's cutting across a right of way?
yeah, so I've always managed this part through the street opening permit process. So in order for a contractor to dig in the right of way, they need to get a street opening permit. And I always take a look at all those things at that time before I issue it. So it's kind of folds into that, I guess.
Do you want to call that? Do you want to call that out in here?
Might make sense to, yeah.
Put it, you know, an EG or an you know, for example,
Utilities, no matter who you are, you need a street opening permit. So
yeah.
The DigSafe process is a little harder to tap because it's a state and federal law. So it's a federal law. So
Oh, yeah.
it's they have to do that anyway. So that's part of it. But we require the DigSafe notification on the street opening permit. So that's the connection there.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking that we would tell DigSafe. I'm saying that if somebody was going to go do something and DigSafe knows that it's going to happen, would we know it was going to happen? Would you know? And what you're saying is yes, because they would file the street opening permit. So that answers pretty much what I was expecting or looking for, is essentially, you know, when stuff is happening in the right of way.
Yeah, I think, all right. So in that permit required section, you asked a question about notification, and I think that got put in there just in case for some reason the public works director wasn't the tree warden, just to make sure that those lines of communication have, so I let myself know every time that. So
I find talking to myself helps too, Rob. It's all
Exactly.
good.
If I'm walking down the street talking to myself, that's probably what it is. It's about tree warden talking to the public works director.
Just remember, you can't have Pat and Dave with you at the same time, because then there's 3 members of the tree board.
It's 3 there, yeah. Good point, Tim. I had a question about, so moving on to tree protection during construction. It talks about putting snow fence around the drip edge of a tree. And frankly, that's a little unrealistic. There may be specific cases where, you know, I don't know, if we're going to do some work around an American chestnut tree, but we might do something like that to create a barrier to protect it, you know. So I'm not saying there aren't situations where we would want to protect a tree in sort of an elevated way. But I don't know if the board would be open to have a little bit more broad terminology there.
I've done some,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Tim.
Well, I was gonna say, I would concur, having it broader, something along at the discretion of, I don't know, according to circumstances. And again, you've worked with these, and Sophie and her team have worked with how to word things so that it gets the intent across. It the goal is to protect the tree, but being prescriptive of the method of a snow fence. A snow fence might not be the best way. It might be hay bales. I don't know.
I think this is an easy edit to focus on the outcomes and not, as Tim said, not be prescriptive about the method to achieve the outcomes. But so long as it's focused about, avoiding injury and, the rest of that sentence, then.
Good, I agree with that approach. Okay, and then we get into exemptions, which allows for emergency situations and utilities and things like that. That basically pulls in. A lot of times, even if it's going to be a public project, I'll still talk with the board about what's going to happen to make sure that everybody's good with what's happening. Then the enforcement, enforcement and penalties, I think needs to be looked at through Sophie's lens, and because I think my experience with some other ordinances, this has got some language in it that we probably want to tighten up a little bit. But
You notice none of us took a shot at it. Because
it's kind of
I trust Sophie's review, and again, her team do an excellent job. So
The badge.
got the badge.
The badge comes up again.
Yeah.
you get a horse with the badge too. I've seen hard hats that are shaped like cowboy hats. So
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to take a stab at revising this based on the comments we've made tonight. Looking at some kind of broad statement to deal with insects and disease, and then revising the makeup of the board a little bit.
I would suggest to use again, it's already in there, is the word standards, and tie that back.
Yep.
Rather than policies for the diseases. The one question I had too is it talks about cross-reference tree conservation and erosion control and planned unit developments, and it references subsection 18-467. I couldn't find that, and I don't know what I was.
So that's in the land use ordinance for subdivision developments. I think there's some guidance in there on plantings, but I'll check that.
Yeah, if you could help me by telling me that, this is ordinance or chapter 38, what chapter that one is, and the same thing for trailer parks and campgrounds.
So it's chapter 18.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Silly me. Thank you.
Chapter 18, the land use ordinance is pretty broad to cover. It's a big deal. But yeah, you'll find that right in the ordinances section on the website.
Thank you.
All right. Did everybody, I know I sent it last minute, but did everyone get a chance to look at the announcement?
Yes.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. We should have just had you and Sophie write it. What did Pat and I do?
We just started.
No, you gave us, that's what I wanted to make sure we were reflecting what you guys are looking for. So I'll be honest.
It
I didn't
never
do
would have
much with
gotten
it.
done. It never would have gotten
Nancy.
done if you guys hadn't done all the heavy lifting.
That's right. Yeah.
There's
Nancy
one
did a nice job working on it. So
There's one sentence fragment still in there, but after that's removed, I think it's a hanging leftover about Arbor Day, but other than that, I think it's good to go.
Dangling participle.
I'm not that good. I think it's just an incomplete sentence without the dangling participle or whatever.
Well, before we post it, we'll make sure we run it by the English department.
All right.
That's not my bag, I'll tell you that. All
Those are-
right, so if we're good with that, that'll get out as soon as the
Wait,
town office. can
I
make
think
that.
Dave's got a comment.
Those of you know Jerry Longcore,
Oh, yeah.
he is a really, I'm serious, he is a really good person to have proofread documents, because they'll come back with as much red as there's black on them. But he doesn't change the content. He's just good at putting sentence structure together correctly. So,
I noticed in the document, there were a couple of spelling errors. I think plan was in there once. I think it should be plant. I would have to review it. And if you want to be detailed about that. And there was one other point too that I noticed.
I think that got fixed. I just checked that and the new one.
Yeah, there could have been some stuff in there fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, before it goes, so that'll go out, Facebook, the website. We'll share it with you all so you can get it to anybody that is interested, and anyone watching tonight on Facebook should look out for that. It'll be posted on the website here soon, so. All right. Did we have any other, we've talked about pretty much everything we've been doing this month.
Oh. So Rob, tonight I
Sure.
quickly wrote up the minutes of the January meeting, because I had just talked with Nancy and she said she hadn't been able to do it today. And in my haste, I wrote Orono agree board instead of tree board, and I didn't notice before I sent it to you.
Okay.
I guess that means we're an agreeable board. I don't know. I hope.
Tend to be, yeah.
Very quick updates on my end. The two University of Maine students who are doing projects related to Emerald Ash Borer are confirmed to present if we'd like them on May 5th, which is our May meeting. And they could either be part of our regular hour-long meeting or perhaps at 6 o'clock, we could have a special session for them. But they've agreed to that. And they've also returned Rob's original materials and provided electronic versions that are now on the shared drive. So that was really good progress. I was also approached by a resident in Old Town to talk about the possibility of a brown tail brigade. So I am aware of the time, and maybe we could talk about that at the next meeting. And it could be another potential University of Maine service learning project for Orono Old Town.
Good. Jessica, what is Ashley's last name?
Martone, M-A-R-T-O-N-E.
Oh, her last name is Martone. I might have made an error on that report that I wrote.
I'll email you both student names.
Oh, Jessica, I'm sorry. No, let's see. Sydney. What is Sydney's name?
Young.
Sydney Young. Okay, great. I will correct that in what I wrote. Thank you. Good.
All right, anything else?
That's all I had.
Okay, so our next meeting will be the first Wednesday of March, which is the 3rd as well. And we will talk about, I'll tidy up the tree log and share that with everybody, and explore the GIS collector, see what it would take to kick that off. It's relatively, it's not as complicated as it sounds. And then I'll present another version of this, and we'll go from there.
Good. Thank
Excellent.
you,
Thank
Pat
you.
and Sophie, for getting me online here tonight. I probably wasn't going to be online except for your help.
Okay,